Okay, well, welcome everyone to the Noontime Knowledge Series for Penn State fundraising volunteers, presidential counselors, and donors. Thank you for joining us. I'm Karen Keller, and my husband Matthew Keller is on the Zoom as well, and we're excited to be hosting the conversation this afternoon. In a moment, Dr. Seth Bordenstein will share more about today's topic, the One Health Microbiome Center at Penn State. Once he's done, we'll get the discussion started. You can enter questions in the chat box at any time or use the raise hand feature when the presentation is over. Before that, we'd like to begin by introducing ourselves and sharing a little bit about how we've stayed involved with research at Penn State.
Good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Matthew Keller, and my wife and Karen and I, we met on the first day of orientation at Penn State. And as they say, the rest has been history. We both graduated in 2000 with degrees in biochemistry and molecular biology. And Penn State has really shaped both of our lives in so many ways, but the co-op program at Penn State that we did while we were there really solidified the start of both of our careers. We realized through that experience that we could kind of use our degrees in many different ways to really maximize our skill sets. Karen's an intellectual property litigator in Delaware, where she uses her Penn State education and social skills to navigate the courtroom and the boardroom. I am the current interim chair of dermatology at Thomas Jefferson University in Philadelphia. And though neither of us perform basic science research as one day we both thought we would, what has not changed is our love for science and innovation. We endowed a lectureship at Penn State through the Alumni Association and the Everly College of Science to help bring some of the great science being done at Penn State into the alumni community. This is where we first met Dr. Bordenstein, and as a physician and academician, I immediately recognized the profound impact that discoveries like the ones the Microbiome Center are making can have in the lives of not only Americans, but really the world at large. Whether it's helping improve preterm infant mortality or reducing the spread of West Nile virus, they're not just making scientific discoveries, but tackling some of the most important issues impacting our world today.
So I'm a lawyer, as Matt said, and also a proud Penn State alum from the Everly College of Science. And I've continued with my passion for the school, its students, and its research endeavors by serving on the Alumni Association Alumni Council and its executive board, the Corporate Engagement Committee for the most recent campaign, and Lion Link, and a variety of other activities. I see the great innovative potential, but as someone familiar with patents and licensing, I also see how the Microbiome Center can increase the visibility of Penn State and increase its ability to use these important innovations to help keep up with universities with larger endowments. Today's tuition and state funding cannot be the only way universities compete with rising costs of education and innovation. The One Health Microbiome Center is one of the ways Penn State will do that. We can't wait to listen to Dr. Bordenstein tell us more about the magnificent work he and about 150 faculty and over 550 members of the center are doing to help improve health for us all.
So that's just a quick introduction to who we are. And our son, who's a high school senior right now, will be joining the Penn State ranks next year when he comes to University Park to study, continuing our legacy with Penn State. Now let's talk about our speaker. Dr. Seth Bordenstein is a professor in the departments of biology and entomology at Penn State, and he serves as the director of the One Health Microbiome Center. Seth is also the former and founding director of Discover the Microbes Within, the Wolbachia Project, a science education program that brings biodiversity, biotechnology, and bioinformatics directly into the classroom. He is the recipient of many awards, including the 2014 Jeffrey Nordhaus Award for Excellence in Undergraduate Teaching, the 2014 Chancellor's Award for Research, the 2018 Chancellor Faculty Fellow Award from Vanderbilt University, and the 2020 Genetic Society of America Award for Excellence in Education. Seth holds a bachelor's degree in ecology and evolutionary biology, a master's in evolutionary genetics, and a doctorate in evolutionary symbiosis, all from the University of Rochester. Seth, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Matthew and Karen. It is wonderful to join everybody today. I've been looking forward to this event for a couple months, actually, as we've been planning about it in the background. I'm sitting here from my office in the Millennium Science Complex at Penn State University, which is part of the Huck Institutes of the Life Sciences. I'd like to go ahead and tell you a little bit about how I came to Penn State. So in 22, I was moving my lab from Vanderbilt University to Penn State University. And I joined the Penn State University system because it is one of the greatest life science operations that I've ever been a part of and have had the joy to contribute to. I consider biological research here at Penn State the Disney World of the life sciences, because there's a theme park for chemical biology, the theme park for infectious biology, this theme park for microbiomes, and we all get a free pass to go through that. And it's in that regard that I want to share why the One Health Microbiome Center that I currently direct is one of the epicenters of that life science operation. Our mission and our vision is that we value and study microbes, microorganisms, as the base of the biosphere. And I'd like to tell you a lot more about that today. So let me go ahead and present my slides. And then I look forward to your questions. So please take notes, jot down ideas, and then at the end, we can have a good chat about what might have inspired you or what other questions you might also have. I've also asked a few colleagues of mine from the executive committee of our center to join us today in case they can help us out at the end of the discussion or at the beginning of the discussion as well. Okay, so the One Health Microbiome Center is one of the largest life science centers on campus. We have over 550 members from students to faculty. 125 faculty are part of this, and they represent 42 departments at the Penn State University Park and Satellite Campus Network, including Hershey and Altoona and several others. We are dedicated to emboldening the research, the education, and service of our Microbiome Center community members. Now, why are we excited about this particular field? It might be a term that you've heard about in the public domains, whether it's popular journals or news articles or radio. What is this microbiome? And I'd like to start with the premise of teaching a little bit, that most of life today is invisible. In fact, that's how it's always been since life has occurred on our planet Earth. And because of that, your body is not just made up of human cells, but it's also made up of microbial cells. And therefore, when you look at a forest and you think about an ecosystem of trees and birds and insects flitting about, you can also take that perspective, look inside you, and think of your body as an ecosystem of your own human cells and, of course, the microbes that are inside and on you. Now, to put this in perspective, on planet Earth, or we could call it planet microbe, there's an estimated 10 to the 30 bacteria cells, if you just counted them up. Now, that's a ridiculous number in some ways, so we've got to boil that down and make a little bit more sense of it. And really what we can think about is there are more bacteria on Earth than there are stars in the universe. There are more bacteria in your mouth than there are people on the planet. The microbes in your body can comprise 3% of your weight. In fact, your brain is about 3% of your weight. So your microbes equal about how much you weigh in your brain. These numbers establish this ecosystem view of our bodies, but also of many other animals and plants and life forms on our own planet microbe. Now, you might ask, what is a microorganism? And of course, a microorganism is something that's invisible. We need a microscope to see it. Otherwise, it's invisible to us. And how is that microscopic life related to visible life? And I want to start as far back as Charles Darwin in 1837. In fact, we just had Charles Darwin's 215th birthday a couple of days ago. And so Charles Darwin, in a very early sketchbook, drew out this kind of tree-shaped thing that he thought represented how life forms are related to each other in this tree-like diagram. And in fact, he wrote in his notebook in 1837 the words, I think organisms could be related like this. It's a window into his brain, but he wasn't quite sure how the diversity of life is all related to each other. If we march forward 140 years or so, in the textbooks in the 1970s, if we looked at how all of life is related, including microbes and the things we can see, what you'll notice is this sort of classic, what we call the 5-kingdom tree of life that you might have learned about in high school biology or college biology. And at the top of this visual tree representation are plants, fungi, and animals. It's no coincidence that these are the things that we could see, and they were prescribed prominence in our visual representations about how life is related. And the base of the tree represents this group down here called Monera, which includes bacteria and all sorts of other microscopic organisms. This is an imaginary tree of life that the stuff that we can see takes prominence in this visual representation. But I want to tell you that both those records, both Darwin's sketch and this 1970 sketch, are wrong, fundamentally inaccurate. The actual genetic tree of life, how all of our genomes are related to each other, looks like this beautiful panoramic view of life on the right. You'll see a very large group of bacteria, and then you'll see a couple smaller groups of archaea and eukaryotes. And everything that's visible in the world, including you, other plants and animals, falls on this genetic tree of life right at the tip of the eukaryotes. This means that we've flipped the tree of life from everything that's visible as the prominent part to everything that's invisible as the prominent, because 99% of life is microscopic. It's invisible, and we need technologies to be able to see it. And we as humans and other animals and plants are simply living as a thin surface layer on this richly devoted microbiome planet that we inhabit with all these different types of diverse organisms. And it's in this light that the One Health Microbiome Center is charting a path and a vision forward that will lead us into being and defining one of the great microbiome centers of the 21st century. And I'm going to hopefully be able to articulate why we think that's the case and how you can become involved in some of these endeavors as well. The microbiome sciences is probably a 10 to 20-year-old field at this point. And we have a century of work in research and education and workforce development to participate in. We're going to exemplify our leadership by the scholars and the scholarship that we have. As I mentioned, 550 plus members in our community right now. We have a commitment and a belief and a mission to relentlessly innovate, whether it's in research, education, or service, to give back to the community that is training us, and ultimately to capture the Penn State University motto of making life better. But we want to do that through making life better from the microbes on up. And there are many ways that we envision doing that, whether it's training, whether it's new innovations and discoveries, or new patents and inventions that relate to deploying the microbiome in beneficial ways to make a positive impact on humanity. So let's go back then to our own bodies. And if you were to take the human body, remember, it's just the human cells right here, but let's lace in the microbiome component. We all have microbiomes. There's an oral microbiome that's slightly different from a skin microbiome, that's slightly different from a gastrointestinal tract microbiome. Microbes live there, but they're different in each of the locations. In fact, your oral microbiome may be more similar to somebody else's oral microbiome than your own oral microbiome is to your skin microbiome. Essentially, that means there's biogeography to our microbial ecosystem. Certain microbes like to live in certain environments, whether it's the pH, the temperature, the biological reactions, they prefer to live in those particular environments. There's 40 trillion microbial cells in our body. And if you were to ask how many human cells there are, there's also about 40 trillion human cells. So we're half microbial and we're half human. And we have about 500 to 1,000 bacterial species living inside or on us at any given point. That's an astounding ecosystem view of our body. Within that ecosystem, that microbiome community, there's actually 100 times more genes than the number of genes in the human genome itself. Now think about that for a second. We have about 20,000 genes in our human genome. And there's 100 times more genes across all of the microbes that live inside and on us. And it's that perspective that might open your eyes to these microbes function. They are doing things that might actually help us, whether it be immune system maintenance, whether it be the way we digest our food, such as insoluble fibers, whether it be nutrient acquisition, chemical and metabolite synthesis, or pathogen prevention. These microbes live in our body. They are doing things for us with this suite of genes. Now, from a genetic perspective, it's very common knowledge that most of our genes in our genome are identical to other humans, 99.9% human genome similarity. But the microbiome is where we see variation at extraordinary levels. Each one of us can have different microbes. In fact, 80% variation between individuals on average. This means that perhaps what makes our bodies function and unique in some ways will be more likely to be attributable to the microbiome than indeed our own human genome. And it's also in that context that many diseases have a microbiome association. Causation is a little bit different from association. We certainly know cases where microbes cause human disease, and we know many more where there's an association, and that remains an area of study and investigation. So I hope I've set the stage for you to think about. There are microbiomes everywhere, and we might be able to understand, optimize, educate, and better study these communities. There's even an atmospheric microbiome. Clouds actually often form because moisture locates around particles or microorganisms in the atmosphere. And so when you fly through a cloud or look up at the clouds, you should be thinking about, I'm probably seeing microbes that have helped form those clouds. When we send astronauts up into space, it's important we know about what microbes they're carrying, bringing, potentially contaminating space environments from Earth and then beyond. The way we make our favorite sourdough can be actually the crust and the texture and the taste can all be influenced by the types of microbes that we put in our starter cultures. So you could go on and on, optimizing warfare or warfighter microbiomes, optimizing our own brain-gut connection. That is, the microbes in our tummy make us feel anxious or could make us feel happy because they change the expression of the happy hormone serotonin, especially on a day like Valentine's Day. So happy Valentine's Day, everybody. If we think about, if you were to open a textbook and say, what do we know about the human microbiome so far? What's on the first few pages of the first chapter? Well, first of all, the microbiomes across the world in humans vary with geography. That is, there will be certain types of microbes in North America that'll be different from those in Africa. And that's because the environmental microbiomes are different, the environments are different, and therefore the humans are acquiring different types of microbes. There's also in westernized countries a very strong trend that our own gut microbiome diversity is declining over time. And that westernization driving potentially these microbiome declines have many multifaceted reasons that are a topic of discussion, scholarship, and investigation. Whether you might think about it as increased medication, increased hygiene attention, and so forth, these might be contributing to a declining microbiome in very westernized countries. And on the flip side of that relationship is, interestingly, in westernized countries, chronic illnesses and things like antibiotic-resistant bacteria are on the rise. And some of our colleagues and scholars in the field have suggested that perhaps our microbiome decline is related to some of these chronic illness increases. And certainly the use of antibiotics is affecting the rapid rise of this health threat of antibiotic resistance in the microbiomes of our own bodies. So here's another way to look at that. This is a chart of the incidence of infectious diseases from 1950 to 2000. And you can see the incidence of hepatitis, mumps, and measles have all gone dramatically down because these are single microbe diseases in which we've developed antibiotics or other means of methods, vaccines, that are causing the decline of these particular infectious diseases very effectively. But on the other hand, on this chart over here, the incidence of chronic diseases and perhaps immune-related disorders is increasing: asthma, multiple sclerosis, inflammatory bowel disease, etc. And it's been hypothesized that these diseases, being much more complex but rapidly on the rise, may be due to our changing microbiomes inside of us. or particularly in westernized countries where we see dramatic rises in these diseases. And I'm happy to say that at Penn State, we have a lot of investigators connecting microbiome studies to diseases on this list directly, whether it be inflammatory bowel disease, allergies and asthma, cancer, health disparities in a more general context, and oral health. So we are very active in the human microbiome part of these types of very big questions that'll be long lasting and important for the next century. For those that are Penn Staters, you know that we have a College of Medicine at Hershey, and we're talking to you right from University Park here. And it's in this interest of human health and microbiome sciences that we are interconnecting these campuses in ways that haven't been done before to really get us to be closer together in research and education. And as you can see, the Microbiome Center sits in the middle of many multidisciplinary units and departments that our investigators are collaborating with right now. And even though Hershey is an hour and a half away, this research moves seamlessly because we're all committed to leveraging our microbiome sciences expertise here, our depth of scale, really our leadership together to make contributions to human health. There's also an aspect to our center that, as you've heard already, that we are known as the One Health Microbiome Center. And here's a nice visual of what we're trying to do with the One Health theme. Because we can't just think about human health anymore in a changing world with a changing climate. There are many other things that are going to influence our own health. Agricultural health and environmental health are all based on microbes being healthy in those environments as well. Yet they'll have different microbes that occur in those particular ecosystems. It's important that we recognize that our health is tied to the success of agriculture, is tied to the success of our environments, because microbes are the base of all three of these ecosystems and flow through to shape the risk of health and disease. Now, the Food and Agricultural Organization estimates that food production worldwide must increase by a marked 60% by 2050, where there will be 9.7 billion people on the planet. It's a surging population growth, and we're not prepared for it. Part of the way we think we can be prepared for it, and with our expertise at a land-grant university, is we can optimize feed and cultivation of agricultural animals, livestock, and plants, whether it be through soil microbiomes that make better plants grow, or whether it be through optimizing probiotics and feed that enhance the digestive capacities of cows, for example. These are areas where our agricultural investigators are pushing the limits to ultimately develop, hopefully, new inventions, ideas, technologies that will enhance our agricultural output to meet this changing need. Moreover, things like drought resistance and drought pressures, for that matter, are going to become more sensitive, particularly for plants as the climate warms. And there are microorganisms that can, in fact, prevent drought pressures from taking hold of those soils or those developing plants. And the idea would be that we are going to have probiotics for the soil or for the plants that will confer some kind of drought resistance to those developing agricultural areas. And if we can do that, we're not just thinking about changing microbes in our own body, but changing microbes in our agricultural pipelines in order to keep us healthy in the end. We have investigators in aquatic systems as well. So this is, it looks like a cuttlefish. This is actually a bobtail squid swimming around, very tiny, a couple inches in size. And if you zoom in on it, you can see these fluorescent blue bacteria under the belly or in the belly of these particular bobtail squid. What makes this squid fluorescent at night is, in fact, the bacteria that lives inside it that glows blue in a fluorescent manner. And it actually does that to prevent predators from attacking the bobtail squid. So it's used as an anti-predation system. In another environment, such as coral, I think we hear a lot about that in the news, that coral is suffering from a warming climate. And so in 2014, in the American Samoa area, you can see coral quite healthy, but in 2015, that coral is bleaching and dying. And that's because major changes in the temperature of the ocean is causing stress on the coral. But why did the coral turn white? What do you think the answer is? Well, the theme is microbes here. And in fact, the coral that is stressed expunge their microbes. They just expel them into the water and lose them. And those microbes are so beneficial to the coral that you get this bleached coral because they lose their microbes and no longer are doing photosynthesis, and their coral are essentially dying at that point. And that is the cornerstone of this microbial world we live in, whether it's us, whether it's ag, whether it's aquatic environments. Microbes are there essentially as puppeteers, playing as a major determinant of key success adaptations as well as key outcomes for ecosystem health. And it's in that regard that our investigators in those areas really are building a world-class reputation, where Penn State notices us and the world notices Penn State because of what we're doing in all these areas. And so when we think about drivers of excellence in this particular field, there's two things that we think a lot about and prioritize. It is that reputation. And that reputation, if strong, will drive investments and resources to come into the center and our scholars and our trainees and our pipelines. And if those resources increase, then we can also circle back in a positive feedback loop into increasing our reputation. And it's with this kind of focus that we are really building a world-class center for the microbiome sciences. So how will our reputation then define our future in the next decade? And that future is going to be defined by a booming industrial market. The microbial products market size by 2030 is estimated to be 300 billion and growing. And so we better be prepared for this in terms of the inventions and patents and discoveries we're making to contribute to that, but also training our undergraduates and graduate students in skill sets that we are all experts at here in our labs, so they can enter these markets with the things that companies want to hire for. And I'm very pleased to report on a couple of key aspects and unique aspects to the Penn State One Health Microbiome Center that's going to allow us to do that. One of them, first of all, is a summer research internship with a molecular diagnostics company that develops a lot of DNA and RNA molecular diagnostic type tools for the life sciences. And our graduate students are sought after by the company called QIAGEN, and QIAGEN is going to accept these students into a summer research internship program so they can get industry experience while they're also pursuing their research PhD. There is a very large microbiome centers consortium across the world. There are about 80 plus centers that consider themselves a microbiome center and form this global consortium. But the ways in which Penn State's One Health Microbiome Center has strengths and may stand out in some of these regards, as well as how will we define our reputation next decade, relate to at least these four main priority areas. First of all, and very importantly, we have the only PhD degree in the world in the microbiome sciences. And we are doing that through something called the dual title PhD degree, which means if somebody wants to get a PhD in food sciences, they will get a PhD in food sciences and the microbiome sciences if they opt for a little extracurricular and training. By doing so, they get the microbiome sciences PhD right in front on their resume, on their CV. So when they go to those companies in that booming industry market, they can see that we are producing the world's only and, in fact, best PhD students in the microbiome sciences. We do have, from our depths of scale, one of the largest and most active centers in the nation. We output thousands of publications that put us probably in the top 3 for most active centers in the microbiome sciences across the country. Our One Health strengths, as I mentioned, are in human, ag, and environment. And as far as wrapping up our outreach opportunities to the rest of the world beyond the academic pillars, let's say, we have also offered one of the best high school lab series in the microbiome sciences today. And it focuses on bringing awareness and biotechnology skill sets to high school classrooms and even intro to college classrooms across the world. I'd like to tell you a little bit more about that. So this is called Discover the Microbes Within, the Wolbachia Project. And what this is a 5-part lab series offered free from Penn State for any teacher, classroom student to download and engage in essentially college level, academic level research in biotechnology. So the first part of this lab is classrooms will go out into their homes or in their schoolyards and collect all kinds of arthropods, and then bugs, insects, and then they do a DNA extraction. They will then copy that DNA and then visualize that DNA and then sequence that DNA and do some bioinformatic analyses. This is stuff that most high school students never get to participate in. It's stuff that we regularly do here at the One Health Microbiome Center, and we make it possible for these high school students and college students to be able to do it. They're also making their own discoveries because they're looking for a microbe called Wolbachia and asking, what's the frequency of this particular bacteria in arthropods? It's estimated to be in about 50% of the world's arthropods. So are those backyard bugs having a 50% frequency too? They're also sequencing the DNA and uploading it to our own database. So they get to produce on their resume a publication record, essentially, of their research and what sequence they produced from DNA. Now, this project is in 44 states in the United States and growing, and in 19 countries across the world, as more and more high school and college classrooms want discovery-based biotechnology skills being developed in the classroom. I want to tell you one gigantic inspiration story from doing this, because at some point, these teachers and these classrooms take it and make it a life of their own. And that's what one New Jersey teacher did. And she decided, I'm going to collaborate with a classroom in Israel, and we're going to look at mosquitoes together and then say, is the bacteria common in Israel and in New Jersey at the same frequencies or not, using this lab series? And these two classrooms get together over a webinar and essentially have a virtual symposium. So the science that we are offering from Penn State is now connecting world and in countries and classrooms in ways that really are inspirational to us, and I hope to you. And this is something you can become part of at some of the links here. So in thinking about mosquitoes, getting closer to some of my own lab's research, mosquitoes are the most dangerous animal in the world, not sharks, not even humans. But the thing that kills the most humans is the mosquito. There's 1 million deaths per year from mosquito-transmitted diseases and 400 million cases of mosquito-transmitted diseases per year. Now, these can range from all kinds of pathogenic, nasty viruses to other kinds of parasites. Now, inside this particular mosquitoes is a couple of viruses that you might have heard of before: Zika virus and dengue virus and chikungunya virus. These are pathogenic to humans, so when a mosquito bites us and they give us these viruses, we don't do so well. But the microbiome offers a great solution and success story that we are actively studying and pioneering. There's a bacteria that we just mentioned in the education series. It's called Wolbachia. It naturally lives in many of the world's arthropods. And when we put it into mosquitoes, it stops the viruses from replicating. It's like we immunize the mosquitoes with a magic potion. And those viruses, because the Wolbachia bacteria are there, no longer replicate. And now the mosquitoes aren't a threat to us anymore. Sure, they can bite and be pesky, but they will not be transmitting these diseases. And it's in that regard that some of our own research here from the center is leading efforts to understand how we can best deploy these mosquitoes into the wild to essentially curb the transmission of the diseases that come from the most dangerous animal in the world. Our graduate students are some of the lifeblood of our curricula and training here. In fact, they often bring a lot of bioinformatics training and a lot of interest and outreach to our 550 membership community. So there's an education and outreach club that builds microbial-based museum exhibits and puts them in local museums, whether it's in the Penn State campus or the surrounding area. We also have a bioinformatics data analysis working group that trains faculty to undergraduate students in handling big data, big microbiome sciences data that a lot of us aren't capable of doing until we get the training from our own graduate students. And as I mentioned before, there are industry internships that these graduate students are partaking in. We are having a national influence. So this is a letter that went to Congress to advocate for a microbiome interagency working group, in which we are urging the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy to renew a charter they had started a couple of years ago to have a microbiome focused group that will prioritize the sciences and education with a strategic plan. And so we signed on to this not too long ago to become a national leader for federal policy around the microbiome sciences. In May, I'd like to just make you aware, if not invite you to our One Health Microbiome Symposium that we're hosting right here in University Park. And we have 4 keynote speakers, 3 from the United States and 1 from Germany, who are joining us to exemplify the scholarship that the center performs and the vision of how microbes are at the base of ag, human, and environmental ecosystems. So Paul is the National Academy member. Gloria just had a microbiome sciences film that you can find on some of the social media apps, Invisible Extinction. Stephanie has been on CNN for some pioneering antibiotic killing work. And Edith is an up-and-coming soil microbiome scientist who's leading a lot of executive committees and functions for the soil microbiome field. Okay, so take that date down, and if you have any more questions or might know anybody, please do not hesitate to get in touch with me. We can share the information. But I want to end on this idea that we all can have an impact as we think about where we are in this field right now. It's 80 years to go in these formative years for research, education, and service. And in light of the president of Penn State's call for Penn State to have a global impact, we're going to need investments in ways that'll elevate our science beyond the normal traditional academic routes. And it's that light that she's highlighting interdisciplinary research excellence in her strategic plan. And I think the One Health Microbiome Center fits that vision perfectly. So we can have support that goes into investing in a workforce for this young booming field that's poised to impact human therapies, such as gut infections that are antibiotic resistant, clinical diagnostics, such as to monitor what types of microbes we have in our own bodies, and even microbial conservation, that is conserving the diversity of microbes in our bodies so we don't lose it through increased westernization of high medication, high hygiene. Our center also has a mission to lead by democratizing tools and knowledge. And you saw the Wolbachia Project Education Series is one example of that. We have a much bigger vision to keep that going in much bigger ways. We want to be a national, if not international, destination for investigators to send their samples to Penn State, and we will deliver their microbiome data right back to them, if not you. So we aim to essentially make microbiome sciences easy for the world that desires knowledge but doesn't know how to do it. We are in very certain need of endowing operations and scholarships for our trainees that'll keep our year-round operations going. And ultimately, that's to shape textbook knowledge and government policy, as you've seen some of that highlighted today. And finally, we really want to invest in a mission that is committed to the highest quality of microbiome research sciences and education experiences. Everything we do isn't just to look at a faculty member or one particular lab. We look at everybody and want to bring this gigantic center to its best from the bottom on up. With that, I will pause here. Thank you for your attention. I hope that we've inspired some questions or thoughts for you to share. And I'd like to invite Matthew and Karen Keller back to the voice here as we can take those questions and answers from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. That was wonderful. Your presentation definitely has raised some questions for me, but as a reminder to anyone in the audience with a question, you can either type them in the chat box now, or you can raise your hand on the Zoom app on your computer or mobile device. And while folks are doing that, I will go ahead and start the ball rolling with a question for Seth. What are some of the biggest research questions the center is currently tackling? I guess specifically, are there any that you're really excited about?
Oh, that's like choosing your favorite kid. And that's a little hard to do because we have wonderful science in all 3 domains of the One Health pillars, ag, human, and environment. I'll perhaps answer that from some of the things that have come to my attention in maybe the past couple months. One is that one of our investigators is working on oral health. Her name is Dr. Laura Wyrick. And you may have heard of a fecal microbiome transplant before, which is to essentially restore good microbes in your tummy when you have a bad infection. And that technology hasn't been branched out to other areas. And Dr. Wyrick is developing an oral health microbiome transplant solution for bringing good microbiomes into our teeth, into our oral communities, and maybe take care of some infectious diseases and problems with our oral health. Another area would be gut infections. So there are nasty bacteria like Clostridium difficile that has that end name to it, difficile, because it's very difficult to antibiotically cure with antibiotics, one of the antibiotic resistant bacteria. We're losing our ability every day to get rid of that infection when somebody ends up in the hospital with it because of the antibiotic resistance. So Dr. Jordan Basson's in our center is developing essentially synthetically engineered microbiome communities that would be able to cause resistance to C. difficile persisting and colonizing in the gut. And that means that we're going to have essentially designer microbiome communities being put right into our bodies for some of the most pressing challenges in medical sciences today, which are these antibiotic resistant infections. And then, as I mentioned, the mosquito story is one that we work on. And we think that mosquito-borne diseases taking their toll at the levels that they do, while not human-centric, obviously we have a very human impact. And the microbial research we're doing on those mosquitoes is giving us new ways to stop those diseases as well. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, and it looks like there's some in the chat, so I'll turn that over to Matt. One following up on the mosquito issue, I think.
Yeah,
Great.
so absolutely. So yeah, there was a question from Fred who wanted to know how you get the Wolbachia into the mosquitoes.
Yeah, great question, Fred. So it turns out the mosquito that is used mostly is called Aedes aegypti. And in fact, doesn't have Wolbachia in nature. And 15 years ago, our colleagues in the field actually poked with an injection needle 10,000 embryos with a slurry of Wolbachia. And guess how many of those mosquito embryos took Wolbachia up successfully? One. One out of the 10,000 somehow colonized that embryo and then grew up inside the mosquito. And then those mosquitoes just normally pass on the bacteria from mom to eggs every generation once it's inside of it, because it lives in the ovaries or the mother's reproductive tissues. And then the program was off and running. So it was a 1 in 10,000 shot that has led to programs like this that are having major impact in the world.
So there's also a question just a little bit about how the microbiome overlays with sort of climate innovation research, how those two kind of interplay.
That's an area that I think I could be best suited by with some help, actually. I think that we have to think about climate stress on microbiome communities, but where the innovations come from are going to be perhaps experimenting in the lab for what types of soil microbes, plant microbes can acclimate to high temperatures, but don't cause any costs to the health of the soil and the plants. What types of microbes could we inoculate on leaves of plants or in the soil so the roots take it up that resist these kinds of climate, especially warming climate pressures? Those are the areas that I think innovation, many startup companies are involved in. And we should be thinking about not just bacteria as a part of that consortia of climate-resistant microbes, but even viruses in the literature have been shown to offer things like heat resistance to developing plants. I think there's a great opportunity to think about merging with the Institute for the Energy and Environment at Penn State, getting our microbiome center more closely allied with their visions for the future, as we can see microbes essentially as helping out many of the pressures that climate's going to throw at our ecosystems over the next couple of decades.
And Anne had a question just about, there was a prune fiber bone density, osteoporosis, microbiome connection. Sounds like there was a Penn State study on prunes. I don't know if you're familiar with that and if you can elaborate a little bit more on that.
That might have predated me, and so I don't have it on the tip of my tongue. But there are known to be pathogenic microbes that can actually invade bones and cause a bone infectious disease. So we probably don't think about bones as having a microbiome community, but sometimes they can. And those are certainly areas where we want to think about bone health from a microbial perspective. I think maybe that's an area that we could learn a lot more about too, because in terms of the literature, there doesn't come across a lot on the radar for microbiome and bone health, density and health. So that's something to keep an eye on for the future.
So speaking of that, you were talking a little bit about things for the future. Looking at the future of the Microbiome Center, obviously a lot of research endeavors are limited a little bit, not based on our imagination or based on our scientific study, but based on the ability of us to fund it. How can alumni get involved in supporting the Microbiome Center? What are some of the different ways that they can do that?
Yeah, actually, let me show a slide. I've got one more slide on that. So we talked a little bit already about some of the ways we can have impact, but to kind of materialize that, there are certainly areas that we see the Microbiome Center could benefit from support, partnerships, and investments. One is that we are doing a grassroots effort to establish a biotechnology facility that we call the One Health Microbiome Center Research Collaboratory. And this is essentially going to be an area of equipment that facilitates high throughput DNA sequencing to characterize microbiomes in all types of environments. We essentially want to have a premier research facility that drives microbiome sciences through DNA sequencing for not only Penn State, but for the nation and the world. We want to be a center for people to send their stuff here because they rely on our experts, they rely on our knowledge, they rely on our staff to be able to do that. So one way to help might be to think about in supporting a research collaboratory growth, which is just getting off the ground in the last couple months. Graduate student scholarships are another excellent way to think about sponsoring the success of a student, whether it's an undergraduate or a graduate student who's developing in the microbiome sciences area and would like support for their stipend or like support for their research. Because this is big data science with artificial intelligence and all sorts of biostatistics, computational infrastructure is an area where we need to see racks of computers in our labs handling big data analyses at scales that we would like to essentially optimize and develop specifically for the microbiome sciences. So I think supporting the infrastructure computationally or in the biotechnology area could have major impacts on the center's growth. And then finally, we're just open to discussions, sponsorships, and connections, perhaps ways in which we can partner with industry alliances, industry members, education partners that see and share the vision that we have for the microbiome sciences being really one of the great shapers of health and knowledge in the next century. So those are some fun areas to think about. But if there's any potential further discussion, certainly that's a priority for me and priority for the team here. And please do personally reach out so we can engage in that a bit further.
Well, feel free to keep putting questions in the chat. In the meantime, you've talked a lot about collaboration in your presentation. For attendees who are not well-versed in academic science and research, why is interdisciplinary collaboration so important to scientific progress?
Yeah, so interdisciplinary sciences is the lifeblood of modern science, the lifeblood of Penn State University research and the Huck Institutes of the Life Sciences, if you're familiar with that. In fact, based on evaluations published in the literature, Penn State is the only place that prioritizes interdisciplinary research when it does hiring. It often hires in clusters, and those clusters allow scholars in one field to be scattered across departments and scattered across colleges. And so when we have 42 departments represented in the One Health Microbiome Center from our faculty and students, it's not by coincidence, it's by strategic design. When we do that, we have food scientists who are microbiome scientists. We have ecosystem scientists who are microbiome scientists. We have entomologists, plant biologists who are microbiome scientists. And so our home is really formed within our department, but now across departments in this One Health Microbiome Center community. And so it's the bread and butter of why we're inspired to be here at Penn State and why Penn State does it better than most other places in the world. There's also a very clear funding stream and forethought about how interdisciplinary research works here. So money doesn't flow into one particular specialized area, like an institute for infectious biology or an institute for chemical biology. Money flows into one institute for the life sciences, and then that institute, the Huck, then shares in how they're scattering money across all types of life science areas. And that creates value for every person on the campus. That creates opportunity for every person. And nobody's really left behind in that kind of a model. But on the same hand, we want to develop world-class leadership in areas of the life sciences, and we can't do it all, of course. And so we think the One Health Microbiome Center is one of those areas on campus right now that is poised to do its leadership role from this sort of organic grassroots community that we all love.
So I think someone might have had their hand up. Preeker Mani, did you have a question? Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yes, I certainly did. Thank you for the excellent presentations. Very informative. I appreciate it. I'm concerned about the type of regimen, especially the food and the nutrients we get and there's impacts on the gut's microbiome.
Yeah.
We know autoimmune diseases is microbiome in the guts has a great impact, activating regulatory immune system as a whole. And we noticed the autoimmune diseases, inflammatory diseases as whole is increasing. And
Indeed.
And autoimmune diseases and allergies and even the cancers, some of the cancer diseases is increasing.
Sure.
I'm wondering if the modern nutrients, which is in the market, with all the additive and all the medications, which you already mentioned about it, but I didn't hear you said anything about the nutrients.
Right.
Our food industries today
Yes.
use. And genetically engineered food, which sometimes is the ratio of the protein and carbohydrate really is not naturally, is different. So what kind of impact would it have on microbiome in the guts?
Excellent question. And a big one, a very general one. I'd actually like to invite my colleagues who are here from the executive committee of our center. So Erica, Yasna, and Jordan. Some of this kind of dovetails with their work on food sciences and also nutrition and gut microbiome sciences. I wonder if one of them might want to jump in on this.
So I can probably speak to that a little bit if you'd like. So I'm Jordan Bazans. I'm in the biochemistry department. And so these are all active areas of research in Penn State. So I think to the first one about autoimmune diseases in the gut. In a collaboration between myself and Vishal Singh in the nutrition department, we actually have a grant that's specifically looking at how food processing affects the gut microbiome and inflammatory bowel disease. And there's a component of the highly processed nature and the loss of fiber, which becomes important substrates for the microbes, as well as the additives that are actually being added in. And one of the questions we sort of have is how we can correct those interactions between the dietary components and the gut microbes. I think one of the great challenges with dietary research is, and I think this is true of the prune example as well, right? There's never one particular compound in the diet, right? So we have to sort of separate individual components out, which is why we start by looking at fiber. And I think, engineering the foods is a really interesting one, but something we're working towards is how we actually engineer the microbes. And so to give an example of how we're doing that, I think everyone knows you have to be really careful if you eat canned tuna, right? Because all canned tuna has very high levels of mercury in it. And, you can buy this special tuna at the grocery store, this sort of safe catch. And they say we test every can, and that's true. But all they're doing is testing to make sure it's safe within the regulatory limits, which is sort of tell you everything you need to know about canned tuna. But one of the things we're sort of addressing is, there's these very interesting microbial pathways where they can actually take the mercury that's in the food and convert it into forms that we can't absorb. And so our solution is, okay, well, if in the short term we can't fix the food chain, can we just act at that crucial point when the human is going to absorb the metals? And so we're genetically engineering gut microbes to overexpress these pathways to block us from absorbing the harmful nutrients while leaving some of the good nutrients like iron or the beneficial things that are in, tuna and others intact. And so that's maybe just sort of two vignettes into how we're addressing those problems here at Penn State.
Thank you.
There was a question from Jen about whether there's any microbiome work being done in human milk and human milk banking, whether there's some benefit there as opposed to formula from a microbiome standpoint.
Let's see if some of our colleagues might be able to answer that. I know that there's some interest in breast cancer in the microbiome. We have some breast cancer experts at Hershey that we're collaborating with. And the premise there is to characterize microbial communities inside breast cancer tissue to see if they're altered from healthy tissue, and those microbes might be contributing to the development of the cancer itself. Is there any more information that one of the colleagues can provide on breast milk banking or breast milk studies?
I had the sneaking suspicion, I'm not sure about breast milk specifically, but there's multiple groups who are really investigating the, shall we say, carbohydrates and how that affects the microbes. And so one of the really beneficial things in breast milk are actually the very complex mix of sugars that humans synthesize. And that's why breast milk, up until relatively recently, has maybe not always been the best substitute. If you go to the store, and I say this as someone who has a toddler, if you look at all these formulas now, there's, adding these comments about adding, human HMOs or modified oligosaccharides, which are just these sugars. And so trying to understand the microbial metabolism and how you can enrich for certain beneficial bacteria that use those sugars is definitely an active research for a number of people in the food science department.
And maybe one general piece of knowledge to add on to that is breast milk can have hundreds of microorganisms inside of it that are beneficial to the developing infant and the way that infant digests food. So when we think about making choices between breast milk and formula, there's this microbial ecosystem that we are ignoring if we think everything is equal. Some of the bacteria can be helpful to preventing pathogenic infections from arising in babies. Some of it is helpful for digesting mother's milk effectively and creating helpful nutrients. And this is actually a wide open area for commercialization and industry too, as formulas might become more optimal for containing many more microbes with their beneficial functions than they currently do right now.
Well, it looks like we're right about at 1 o'clock. Dr. Bordenstein has been gracious enough to stay on if people have additional questions, but if you do need to leave and your question wasn't addressed here, you can definitely reach out to the volunteer programs team and they will go ahead and follow up with you with answers from Dr. Bordenstein or the team itself. A video recording will also be sent to all the invitees, and if you have any friends or colleagues you think would be interested in the topic, feel free to send them the link to the Raise Penn State YouTube channel where it will be posted. And thank you so much, Seth, for being here and sharing this exciting information with us. And a big thank you to our attendees. From what I understand, it was a record turnout today for this Noontime Knowledge event. Seth's contact information is also available here for anyone that wants to follow up on questions about the One Health Microbiome Center's research. And if you want to support Seth's work through philanthropy, we've included the Eberly College of Science Senior Director of Development and Alumni, Kim Neely, who would be happy to help you with that as well. The Noontime Knowledge series will be back on March 13th with a session on Restorative Justice Initiative. So be sure to check your inboxes. This officially concludes the formal event. We hope to see you next month. Have a wonderful rest of your day and Valentine's Day. And thank you again. So for anybody that wants to stay on, feel free to stick around. But otherwise, this is the end of the program.
Thank you, everybody. It's so nice to see that some of you enjoyed it. And we had some thoughtful questions as well. And we're here for more as you want to see it, or even after this, just reach out to myself or Kim.